GitHub and pull that down. I think it's going to be easiest if y'all just kind of copy paste little chunks as we go along instead of trying to keep up with every single little thing I'm typing. But yeah, in case you all want to follow along and you just want to see the apps that we're creating, we're going to start by making what I call the simple app, and it's going to be a functional app, and it'll kind of be cool. And then we're going to make it look pretty, so that's what the nice app is that's in the repo. So, yep, and then also you would want to install those dependencies if you are installing them at this very moment, because I'm about to move on from the slide. You can find that dash, if you like say dash get started, I think it's up there somewhere, you can figure out what these dependencies are. Okay, cool. So a little bit about me. So I'm Blair. What I do is I actually work for Galvanize, and I work in their admissions department right now. So my title is Technical Admissions Advisor, which is a fancy way to say that I do a lot of the interviews for the Data Science Immersive. But I wear a lot of different hats at Galvanize, and I do a lot of different things. But I also, before I became the Technical Admissions Officer, I had gone through the Data Science Immersive myself. Not here in Phoenix, I actually came from Denver, and that's where I went through the Immersive last summer, actually. And so I just moved here a month ago, so I'm still pretty new. When I came here, it was like, or when I left Denver, like March 1st or something like that, it was like, 30 degrees or something like that, and then now it's 99 today, so that was pretty awesome, a little switch for everything. But so I'm still getting acclimated to the wonderful desert. Right, yeah. I'm still loving it, don't get me wrong. I'm a sun freezer, so my winter skin has already been shed. But a little bit about why I use Dash, and we'll start talking about Dash and like what it does and how it compares to other technology in Python right now, and why we think it's so awesome. But I use Dash primarily because I do a lot of consulting work kind of on the side, sometimes under the table. And a lot of the times there's small businesses and they say, hey, I've got some data, I don't know where my profit margin went, I need to figure out where my expenses are going or something like that, and they just need someone to kind of munch through what's going on and make some simple business intelligence. And a lot of the times these folks work in different states from me and I never meet them. And so what I like to do is to make interactive, playful Dash apps for them and mount them with Heroku, and then I give them a little URL and they say, oh, this is so fun and pretty, and then that's my little contract gig that I like to do on the side. So that's a little bit about why I use Dash. So our agenda for tonight is I'm going to intro Dash. We're going to talk about that. Like I said, I'm going to be doing a live demo. I'm going to be coding along. I've got a second computer here because it actually has all the code that I'm supposed to be writing down. I'm sure I'm going to get lost somewhere, so I'm kind of cheating tonight. But yeah, we're going to build a simple app, and then we're going to make it nice and pretty after that. And then if we have some time, I'm going to kind of show you a personal project of mine that I actually abandoned at this point, but it still kind of displays a lot of fun things you can do with Dash. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. Also, just so you know, I'm not like a professional web developer guy. I just, whenever I have a problem in data science and I want to find a solution to it, I Google around and I talk to people about what the solution is, and I kind of hack together something that works for my purposes. So, yeah, I definitely feel like I'm pretty effective with Dash, but I'm by no means an expert. So that's kind of where I'm sitting at this. All right, so what is Dash? Let's talk about Dash. It's built on 3 different technologies. So, first of all, is there anyone here, and please raise your hand nice and high, anyone here who actually works with Dash or has, some minimal experience? We got 1, 2 maybe? 2, okay, cool. So some folks have heard of Dash before. Okay, so the first technology that Dash is built upon on the back end is going to be Flask. Raise your hand if you work with Flask. Raise them up all nice and high, because I'm trying to figure out where we're going to be talking most about things during this. Okay, cool. So we have some exposure to Flask. So Flask is the back end kind of Python web framework for, if you've got a PNG that you made with Seaborn or something like that, you're like, oh, look at this pretty little plot I made. You can use Flask to mount that PNG. You can put some markdown text underneath it. You can say, this is my analysis that someone should read. And then you can use Flask to mount that via Heroku, which is a web service that you can use to mount these web frameworks. And yeah, it's a pretty simple, easy to use web framework for people who don't want to learn a real web framework like Java-based and JavaScript-based web frameworks. The second technology that Dash is built upon is going to be Plotly. How many folks have worked with Plotly? I'm expecting more hands, honestly. Yeah, there's a few more hands. Okay, so Plotly is really cool because, and this is where I started getting really interested in data visualizations, because I didn't want to learn JavaScript, but I still wanted to make interactive plots of some sort. So Plotly is wrapped around D3, which is a JavaScript library. It stands for Data-Driven Documents. And so if you've seen kind of, maybe, I remember the first time I learned what D3 was. It was in the 2016 election, and I saw some dude on some TV screen. He touched the TV screen, and the state came up, and it had some statistics about the state, and then he touched the state again, and it went back. So it's kind of what does these interactive things, and Plotly's built on top of that. So if you want to make some line plots, or if you want to make some bar graphs, interactive pie charts or whatever, Plotly does those things. It also makes these really cool like choropleths, and I'll show you my own choropleth that I was making here in the end. So it has a lot of fantastic technology that it utilizes, and it's what's bridging the gap between people who only want to learn Python but still want to do interactive fun things. The last technology that this is built on is going to be React.js. Of course, there's no JavaScript required, but does anyone here actually work with JavaScript, React.js? Okay, cool. So you guys might be offended by what I say because I don't work with it. I know how to talk about it in a way that a Pythoner would talk about JavaScript. But yeah, it makes these really fun, playful little UI elements, like little dropdowns, and it allows you to kind of select components that will react to other components as you're playing with them. So I guess what I've heard most people introduce React as is that if you think of Excel, spreadsheet, if you can have functions that depend on one another in that spreadsheet. If you change one of those functions, it changes and reacts everything else in there. So it's the same kind of idea with the web framework, is that you can select some kind of component, you can manipulate it, and it will reactively change other things in your web page. So those are the three technologies that Dash wraps all together in just Python. And it's really nice that happens because I'm now able to make fun interactive web apps. And by the way, Dash came out June last year. And it's still in development, so that's kind of why earlier on my first slide there were 4 things you have to install. I'm sure one day that's going to be a lot more succinct, but that's kind of where it's at right now, and it's constantly being developed. Now maybe I'll get some questions going on that later. A quick word on Dash versus Boca. So a lot of you folks, has anyone here heard of Boca? Use Boca? Okay, so we got some more Boca fans than everything else so far. Okay, so I don't work with Boca because I find Dash to be easier to get using with applications that I need to use it for. But there is one plot that I want to show you about why you should care about Dash if you currently care about Boca. So let me show you that little plot here. So this is the number of GitHub stars for the name Boca and Plotly, the name Boca and Dash repositories. And so as you can see, when Boca was released in 2013, it started going up. It's had this nice linear trend since then. And then there is the release of Dash, and it is skyrocketing currently. And it's because I find it to be extremely accessible. People who know Flask, who know Plotly, and now they just need to combine them in a nice way. So it's not so much like reinventing the wheel. It just is putting a lot of things that people already know in the Python community together in a way that is easily and accessible. So that was all lots of cool, fun stuff. We're going to talk about, let's do some coding now, huh? That's what we all came here for, huh? Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a new directory. Oh, I should probably make this a little bit bigger, huh? Ooh. Oh, no. A little bit too big. All right. You can see that, right? Yeah, it's good enough. Okay, so desktop, let's make a new directory, let's call it dash dirt, why not? All right, let's get in there. What's dash dirt? Oh, why is my autocomplete not working? Oh well, okay, so we're in this blank directory, so now we're going to just make an app.py, and then we're going to start coding in that app.py in Atom. Atom is my favorite text editor, it's what I like to use. So let Atom fire up. Of course, it's going to be nice and tiny, so I got to make that bigger. Of course, it's not making it bigger. That's big enough. Okay, great. So the first things that we got to do is we got to do some importing, right? Like I said, I'm totally going to be cheating as I go along. So there's four main libraries that we got to import. So we're going to import Dash. We got to import Dash HTML components. Yeah. No, it's not. What are you talking about? It's TMHL. It's the new way you spell HTML these days, right? We're going to say as HTML. import dash core components as DCC, and that's what we'll import for right now. So kind of talking about how those technologies are segmented. Flask is going to be doing a lot of that HTML stuff that we just imported, and then the dash core components is going to be handling a lot of the React JavaScript logic that's under the hood, along with handling the plotly figures. We'll talk about what a plotly figure is and what you have to worry about when you make a plotly figure. So, the other thing that I forgot to mention is that we're going to be doing a visualization on the iris data set. So I'm sure everyone here has heard of the iris data set. It is one of those standard library, or one of those standard data sets that's inside of pandas. And then just so that we actually are a little bit more acquainted with that library, is that we're going to go. I have a Jupyter notebook that actually will have a quick kind of rundown on what this data set is. Let's open up that Jupyter notebook. Great. Okay, so let's make it bigger. So I'm going to kind of mostly copy and paste this into my app, but just so you all are aware, the iris data set, it is this classification data set. If you have some features about flowers, irises, their petal length, their petal width, their other little things. And the idea is that you can use this data to kind of classify one of 3 different types of irises. So we're going to load up that data frame, and then we are going to be using kind of the names to visualize the colors of this in our plot, these scatter plot. That's what we're going to be making, this big old scatter plot of these irises. So straight up copy that. We're going to go back to Atom, and let's make a function. So def load iris. Actually, we're just going to say load df. Should probably also import pandas because that's helpful to have when you're trying to do these. I'm not even going to put any arguments in. We'll talk about, probably won't even talk about that, but this is just so that we can segment it away from our HTML and from our other fun stuff that we're going to be having. So that's the code that we're going to use to get our data set. But that's not very exciting because we all probably know what pandas does. The next part that we want to start getting into is going to be, I guess we'll talk about the app, and we'll talk about how Flask is working with all this. So to initialize our Dash app, which by the way, its back end is all Flask, we're going to say app is equal to capital dash, and I'm just going to leave it without any arguments for now. We'll talk about when we try it. Well, I'll tell you when we try to deploy this, what kind of things we'll want to change in there. And then we're also going to make an if name block here at the bottom. So when you're trying to run your app and try to debug it, you're just going to say app.run server. And then this is a really helpful little feature that they've already put in here. Debug equals true. So that means as you make changes to your plot or to your script, the back end of Dash will automatically say, hey, I noticed a change in the app file, and it will make those changes on your Chrome browser. Well, I'm going to be using Chrome. Hopefully you use Chrome too, or maybe Firefox if that's something you're into. Okay, so great. We have this app. It's instantiated. Doesn't do anything quite yet. So the first thing that we got to start doing with this is we got to make a layout for it. But then don't worry about the specifics of HTML. I barely know any HTML. In fact, I think pretty much the only thing you need to know about HTML in order to get working with Dash is that HTML works with these little things called divs, and you can manipulate those divs, and they have things in them. And then as long as you know that much about HTML, congratulations, you can probably do this entire app without having to think too much harder than that. So to get our app layout started, we're going to say app.layout, and so that's going to be actually equal to an HTML div. So HTML.div. So like I was saying, the HTML from Dash HTML components handles all of this that we're going to be handling right now. So the first thing that we'll put inside of our div is going to be a header of some sort. So I'm going to go with HTML.h2, and then we're going to say iris visualization. And I'm pretty sure that's how this all works. Yeah, I think that's how it works. Let's test it out. I think we have enough to actually run our app right now. So how do we see how we're doing? Great question. Thanks for asking that question. So we're going to go back to what we were doing over here, and we're going to say Python app. That's it. Let's see if it runs. Hey, look at that. I didn't break anything. Cool. So we're going to go back to Chrome. We're going to go, oh yeah, big thing I kind of forgot to mention. It will tell you the URL of which you are using. And you can manually change that port that it goes to if you feel like doing that. Right now, by default, it goes to 8050. So I have that currently kind of saved in my browsing history, so we'll go and see. It looks like, hey, iris visualization, wonderful. So we have an app. We know how to put some text in it. Let's put a plot in there now. All right. But the first thing that we're going to do for that plot is that we have 4 features in that data frame. We have petal width, we have petal length, and what was the other one? It's sepal, that's right. It's called sepal length and sepal width. So we want to have, I guess the idea is that we want to take these 2 features and we want to have an app that can kind of say this feature against this feature, and let's see what they look like against each other. So we can just kind of visualize it and make a little scatter plot that changes on the fly. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to make these kind of drop downs. So we will we're just going to put it in the same div. It's not the best practice right now, but we'll make it pretty later. So no, we're going to make the div now. Yeah, we're going to make the div now. So we're going to make another HTML.div. It's a function. And in there, we're going to make it a list. And so the first thing we're going to put in this list is now the dash core components. And like I said, the dash core components handles 2 things. It handles the plotly figures and also handles the React JavaScript stuff. So this is going to be the first thing that we do that has to do anything with JavaScript. So dcc.dropdown. Real original name there. You're also probably noticing that the notation is probably a little bit different than most folks would use for coding out Python apps, but this is kind of what is suggested on the dash documentation. So we're going to kind of roll with the dash documentation. So yeah, so we got this dash dropdown, and what we need to do is we need to find a way to communicate what this dropdown object is to the other components inside of our app. So we're going to give it an ID, and we're going to say this ID is equal to, we'll say dropdown 1 or something like that. So we're going to have 2 dropdowns. We're going to have one for 2 different, X and Y axis, right? So we're going to have a dash dropdown, and then we want to give it some sort of options. So something that it's going to say, like, these are the built-in what you can select from in this dropdown. So we're going to say, options equals, and then we're going to use a list comprehension to actually make this. So one fun fact about things that are built in Dash, which is built by the same company from Plotly, is that almost everything you interact with in some way or fashion is going to be a dictionary. So hopefully you're really comfortable with your dictionaries. So the first dictionary we're going to make a list of dictionaries, and so it's going to have its label that it's going to be called from inside of the dropdown, and then the second part of the value of our dictionary is going to be what we call from inside of the component, so that it can kind of use that label. And I guess I should also try to get the names from, or I guess we want the columns, right? The columns of that data frame. So we're going to say, I'll give you the label, which is our key that I was telling you about, I. And then we're going to also give it another value in here. I for I in df.columns, and we're going to just say up to the first, I believe, 4 columns. That's because if we recall back in our notebook, the first 4 columns are the ones that we're interested in, and this 5th one that I added over here is the target. The target is the number, whether it's a setosa, a versicolor, I don't know, it's flowers, or if it's a virginica. So yeah, we only want these 4 columns to be selected. So we got those 4 now selected in there as our options. And the last thing we have to do is we have to set a default. So when this app is first generated, what's the first thing it's going to have? And so that is going to be the value argument. So we're going to say value equals df.columns, and we're just going to say the first column name, which I guess is sepal length. Cool. So that's going to be the default for that one. All right, let's test that one out now. See if I actually messed it up or not, huh? Okay, so we saved it. Cool, fun. Let's see. Oh, look, I made a problem already. df is not defined. Oh, that's right. Okay, so one other thing. I should probably return my data frame, huh? Return df equals df. Okay, now let's try it. Right, because I don't have sklearn installed, do I? All right, so from sklearn, import datasets. There we go. Let's see if it runs now. Of course it doesn't. Does it have column, not columns? What was that? Shout it out. Thank you. All right, now it's going to run, I promise. What did I do now? 924 columns, df.com. See, this is why I knew this was going to happen, so I was like, oh, I should probably just make sure I actually have the code directly in front of my face so that I don't mess this whole thing up. So df.columns, what is it saying here? Mid-takes. What did I mess up here? Shout out if you see it. You don't see it, that's why you're shutting it out.
Looks like drop down, you're passing 3 arguments when it only wants 1. Is that what it's saying?
You might be right.
No, that's not it, because
Yeah, no.
it runs otherwise in the other example. So that's not what it's complaining about.
Maybe.
Div.
No one sees it, huh? We're just gonna get past it right now. So if I say, let's just make a quick little thing here. So cols equals df.columns, and so we'll figure out if this is actually the problem that's going on right now. Cols element. Let's see if that does it. I doubt it will. At least I can. Okay, so it's definitely what is being emitted right now that's not liking right now.
Well, drop down is my guess, but I guess not. Let's see.
I'm even looking at my code right now. I'm just thinking.
So, Blair, on your example on GitHub,
Yo.
when you have values to df.columns, it says that position 1 is that.
There are 2 dropdowns, and the second dropdown has. So if you guys are looking at the source code on GitHub right now, the second dropdown has the first column selected, and then the first dropdown has the 0th element selected.
Oh, I think you need to pass an array to your div. Is that it? Line 19.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, do I have a wait? Okay, where was that?
So
Yeah,
your first
that's
it's div that is the problem. So you need to put an open bracket there.
Open square bracket and then close square bracket.
Oh, I think you are. I see what you're saying.
And then where does the
How close is it?
Yeah, that's what it has on your source code too. You have a square bracket. And
Hey, I think it worked. Maybe. Let's find out.
Live coding like a boss.
Hey, check it out. Look at that. All right, everybody. All right, we're only going to see that like 13 more times. Cool. All right, first hurdle overcome. So that is cool. Now we got this first little drop down going on. Thank you for helping me out, everybody. It's a team effort tonight.
Good job,
All
Blair.
right.
Keep it up.
All right, so we got our first little drop down working out. So the thing that we want to do is that, at least what I want to do with this app, is so we have one drop down. I want to put the other column drop down right next to it. So let's see if I just make it another drop down, if it's going to work for us. So we are going to just take this. That's our whole little div right there. Going to comma. Oh, too far indented. And so we're going to give it a different name. We're going to call it drop down 2, real original. We're going to use the exact same options for our second thingy there. And then we're going to say it's now going to be sepal width instead of sepal length. Or maybe I have this switched around. Anyway, it's going to be a unique column. So we're going to look at it. Hey, look, it's still restarting. That's what I said. The debug equals true. It's what does that. I once took it out, and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't live reloading. So debug equals true. It'll save your life. And then check this out. That's not what we wanted now, is it? No. So we wanted to have it to the right of it, not necessarily right underneath it, because that's kind of ugly. So what we are going to do to fix that is we are going to start styling our divs. So that's why I decided that we were going to put each dropdown in its own div, is because you can kind of use styling that you would normally see in normal web dev stuff, but in the same way you can kind of control it with these divs right here. So what you want to do is you want to put the style argument right after the list that holds everything inside the div. So we get our style, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say the width is going to be equal to, and then you can either put, by the way, you can hard code it like 400 points, or you could say percentages. And so if you're trying to develop something that also works for mobile apps, you want to use percentages. So I'm going to say 50%. And then I'm going to purposely leave it broken right now because you will see why. Because I'm trying to show you guys certain errors that you will come across so that you don't have to, that way you can be like, oh, Blair already showed me why this thing doesn't work. So yeah, we're going to send them both to 50%. It's going to be, something's going to be broken, but that's okay. And then the other argument that we're going to want in here is float right. All right, so let's make sure it's working. Detected changes. Oh, hey, it's working. So we'll refresh it. That's not what we wanted now, is it? So what we're going to do is we're just going to make one small change to our first column. And so we have to call it this thing like an inline block. Or I guess it's the argument to display. Display inline block. It's still working, didn't break anything. Hey, look at that. Okay, cool. So now we have the sepal length over here. We can change that to something else. And then we can have another column. So great. We can select two different columns. Now we want to use the selections that we currently have and somehow feed that back into another component that is our plotly chart. And then we're going to take that plotly chart, feed it back to the app, and then it'll be a cool little scatter plot for everything. So I think there's going to be a lot less feedback kind of going on right now, and a lot more of just straight up coding. So I guess the first thing that we're going to talk about here is that we're going to have, after our drop down, we're going to have one more DCC, another dash core component. This is going to be graph now. And so we're just going to give it an ID. I'm just going to call it main plot or something like that. Oh, this is the convention. I like underscores, but by convention that I've seen in documentation, I'm just going with hyphens. It bothers me, but it's what I'm supposed to do. I'm just trying to follow convention right now. So we have the DCC graph, and then there's this thing called callbacks. So this wrapper that you're going to use for your functions. Let me slow down real quick. All right. So first of all, we got to make a function that makes a plotly figure, and a plotly figure is made of two different things. It's got the data and it's got the layout. And the thing about this function that makes these plotly figures is that it needs to be able to react quickly to what's going in and out of it. So there's what we do in Python is we give it a wrapper called app.callback. This is built into Dash, and it's what's going to handle all this feedback between components. But before we do that, we need to import some new stuff. So we're going to go back up here, and we're going to say, I think it's from, yeah. So from dash.dependencies. That's totally not how you spell it. Is that how you spell it? No. Dash.dependencies. Yeah, dash.dependencies. And we're going to import two things: input and output. Okay, cool. So going back down here, let's start our, I guess if we have our function, we'll call it def plotly maker. Why not? then before I actually kind of define that function and all the fun things it's going to do, we're going to give it its wrapper. So we reference the app that we instantiated. We say .callback, and then it accepts a couple arguments. So the first argument it's going to take is what do you want to have outputted to your app layout. So the answer to that is that we want it to have the ID of main plot, right? And then we have to tell it what it's putting out. So it knows the ID. This first argument is how it tells where this thing is going. The second thing that it needs to know is what is this? It's not supposed to be a string. All right. The second thing that it needs to know is, like I said, the type. So we're just going to say, oh, it's a figure. Great. And then the next thing it's going to take is a list of inputs. Even if you are only using one input, and this took me like a half hour to figure out one night, so I'm letting you know right now. You're only using one input in your callback, still needs a list, okay? You can't just do one output, one input. It's got to be output and a list of inputs. So we're going to give it an input, and let's give it, I'm going to call drop down 1. And then, so it says, okay, what is the ID that we're trying to get? Drop down 1. What do we want to pull from drop down 1? The answer is value. Like I said, everything in Plotly functions more or less as a dictionary, so it goes in there and says, do you have value selected? And it sure does. And value is constantly being changed every time you select something different in your drop down. So, and then the other input that we're going to put in there is going to be drop down 2. All right, cool. So we got both of our inputs there. I'm going to put that over there, and then so this is why I waited to put any arguments inside of my function. That's because you are able to rename your inputs that it puts in there. So if you have 2 inputs in your list, it's going to stick those 2 inputs right in your function here. And so we will say that we have col1 and col2 into our function. Great. So now our function generator has got to be, returns a Plotly figure documentation. It's important. You guys want to hear a joke? Yeah. Okay. So I used to not do documentation because I'm gonna be able to know what it says later. So every programmer ever, right? And then when I was actually in the data science immersive, someone made this joke to me. I think it was actually one of my instructors. Anyway, they said, documentation is kind of like sex, and that when it's good, but when it's bad, it's better than nothing. And ever since I heard that, I've always put something in my documentation, even if it's cruddy little comments somewhere. I got to tell myself, future Blair, what I was trying to do, and it saves me so much time. So even though I'm live coding this out for you, I still think it's important that we have good practices. What's up?
Is the arguments there positional based on the array, and then also can you do keyword arguments for your Plotly maker function?
And so his question is, are the arguments in the plot here, so Plotly maker, are these going to be dependent on the positions of the array? And the answer is yes, they will be. So col1 will always be the first input. Col2 right here is going to always be the second input.
Can you do like col1 equals drop down 1 and do it keyword based too?
I would imagine so. But I guess why would you want to do that? Because you already set what the initial value is supposed to be when you're making your dash core component. So it would almost be random. It would probably work, honestly, but I'm not sure if you'd want to do it or if it would be a good practice. Does that answer your question? Yeah, Rudy. All right. So, like I said, we got 2 components to every single figure. So the first thing is data, and we're going to instantiate our data variable, which is going to be an empty list for now. And the other thing is going to be a layout, which I haven't talked about yet. So now we got to do some more importing real quick before we continue on with that. So going back to the top here, we got to, layout it needs to be a specific Plotly object. Specifically, it needs to be a graph object. Not going to explain that any further. That's all you're going to know about it. So we're just going to import Plotly .graph object. Graph objects. Oh, it's graph obs as go. So Plotly.graph objects as go. So that's how we're going to use our graph objects. And layout is going to be equal to go.layout. And we're just going to leave it blank for now. That's the entirety that we're going to mess with that. I'm going back up here to data. So I guess let's take our columns. We're going to access our pandas data frame, and then we're just going to make a plotly thing. Yeah, let's do it. So I guess I'll put some more documentation in here. So we're going to use our markers, and then yeah, we'll go ahead and say for val in range of 3. And the reason why I'm making a for loop that has range of 3 is because there are 3 different types of irises. Just remember, and if you recall in our iris notebook, the 3 are referenced in the pandas data frame via a 0, a 1, and a 2. So I'm just trying to access those. So for val in range 3. And then we're going to make this other graph object. Now we're pretty heavy now into plotly. So trace equals go dot scatter. This is just another one of those specific plotly things. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, our trace is going to be, we have an x and we have a y for every trace. So our x is going to be df. We're going to pass it a mask. So I guess we want to give it col1, right? That's going to be, no, we don't. Yep, target. It's going to be target. So the reason why it's target is because target is this. So we want to select the target that is equal to our value, and then we want to get the column that is being inputted, so col1, and we're going to do the exact same thing for our y. So y, col2, and we're also going to give it a specific, actually, we're not going to give it a mode yet. We're going to break it again, and then we'll give it a mode, and then you all see why. The other thing we got to do before we're done moving on from this section is we got to just pass this trace to our data list. So we're just going to append trace there to data. So now we have data. It's a list of traces. Every trace has an x and a y. Exciting, right? Then we have a layout object. Don't need to worry about that quite yet, what it does. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to return a dictionary, and it's going to say data is data, and it's going to have layout as layout. Excellent. So in theory, if I save this, it's going to run, and it's going to make a nice pretty plot. Who thinks it's going to work? All right, let's do it. See if it works. Hey, it works, but it's wrong, right? Because we didn't specify the type of plot that we made. So by default, it just makes a line, a really ugly line. So let's fix that first thing really quick. So we're going to go into our trace, and we're going to give it another little argument. And we're going to say, I think it's mode. Yeah, mode is equal to markers. Save it. Hot dog. Look at that. I mean, it's not very pretty right now, but it's something. So we have that going on for us right now. I feel like I'm totally missing something right now. It should make it look a lot better. Let's make sure everything works. So we can change that. I feel like it's just not. Is it showing all the targets right now? Oh, thank you. Yeah, you're right. I was like, where's my other things that are going on here? Appreciate that. All right, so it's still working. Hey, look at that. Okay, so this is the endpoint for the simple app that I wanted to make. We have working components that are relying on JavaScript and stuff like that, and they can make these cool little plots. We can hover around and we can kind of query what's going on in here. So that's going on. And also, just so you know, Dash has this little toolbar up here, and if you want to distinguish from the x-axis and select everything on the x-axis, and you just want to hover on whatever's closest, you click on this, and you can say, oh, hey, look at that. Now I'm only hovering on whatever's closest. So now the next things that we're going to start doing is we're going to make it pretty. What's up?
So this is freeware, right? Everything up to this point
Yes.
is freeware.
Free. And a word on free is that a lot of people, if you folks know about the Plotly environment, is that usually got to require some kind of credentials and stuff like that. And everything you can work with in Dash does not require credentials. In fact, every time I make my little dashboards, and 3 dash, I guess I could clarify that at the beginning. Every time that I make a dashboard, it does not require any credentials, and it works on Heroku without anything like that. So, of course, if you scale up or anything like that, or if you actually expect to get some kind of legitimate amount of traffic going through, maybe things will change. But, like I said, I use this just for clients. I don't expect to have more than like 3 people at a URL at any given time. So, and my monthly Heroku bill to mount that is going to be like $5, or something like that. So, it's get off my back, right? Any questions before we start making stuff pretty? What's up, bro?
You can do a trend line.
Yes, you can. In fact, I will show you a regression thingy that I have built at the very end here. Also, Austin, how are we doing on time? Do you want how much more do you want to do?
You have 11 minutes.
11 minutes.
But that's not really true. So, I mean, it's your venue. You're going to kick
All
us
right,
out, Chris?
all right. We will just.
I mean, I'm not kicking you out. You do
Yeah, we
you.
probably
Don't kick me
started
out,
after
everyone.
7. I don't think you have 11 minutes until 8. But it's probably 20 minutes.
All right. So let's do
Read the
some
crap.
things right now. So the first things that we're gonna do is we're gonna flesh out our layout. We're gonna talk about why that's even a thing.
There is a question.
Oh. Yes.
Question. So, what is the most convenient to find, use that internal server at the address 127.0.0.1 to publish or share with other people so they can access or catch that?
Yeah, so we're getting to that's the question on deployment. So currently the way I've been coding this out is that it's supposed to run locally, and that's all it does. So what you got to do is first of all you got to specify a Flask server. So to make a variable in your script called server, you can get that from Flask, or you can also get it, I believe, from the Dash app. Doesn't really matter, but you got to make a server, and that's going to be used in your proc file for Heroku, because Heroku needs to know a couple things about your app when you're trying to mount it. So what I'm doing right now is I'm making my computer a one-threaded server, but it doesn't really. You probably.
So Heroku, people might not know what Heroku is.
I'm
So
terrible at talking.
Heroku is like a web application hosting service. They'll host Python apps, they'll host Ruby apps, they'll host a whole variety of other apps, and they have very relatively cheap, low-tier hosting that you can host a Python app like this. So he's using Heroku as his deployment mechanism to reach the broader world. If you're
the word Heroku is sort of, I can just deploy AWS server.
Yeah, you could do the same thing. Sure.
Yep.
And if you know how to scale a Flask app and set up proxies and things like that, you can absolutely do that. And Dash's deployment story might be difficult because it's new, because it's only a year old. So there might not be a lot of people.
It's deployed
experience
actually just like a
deployment,
Flask app. There's really not much more that you need to be concerned with. The only thing that I think you really need to be concerned with is that when you make your requirements.txt file, or however you want to do that, you need to install all the other dependencies for Plotly and Dash, other than G-Unicorn, which is what I would use when I'm using Heroku. And then also just in the broad scheme of things, like the idea is to start with, I know nothing about Dash, but I want to put something on the web. I'm going to get this pretty much everywhere that you can develop your apps, but I'm not going to go into any of the technical specifics of how to actually put a URL to that and how to share that. That's a whole, basically the reason for that is that there are 2 tutorials that I'm going to reference for that. Those 2 tutorials are going to be Dash's tutorial, which is great. You just Google Dash Plotly Heroku deployment, and it'll be like one of the first links to come up. And then it also references Heroku's tutorial as well. So you use those 2 tutorials, and you can easily get a Dash app running in about an hour. I say easily, even though I accidentally broke mine before I was trying to debug it before I came in here, and I could not get it to be undebugged. And I was like, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. I just want everyone to know how to make the app. And then there's plenty of resources out there once you get a Flask-like app, which is basically what Dash is. It functions on the back end as a Flask app. How to get that mounted. Any questions before we get into styling? Okay, cool. Let's get into styling, and we're just going to do some of the styling right now. So the first things that we're going to talk about is let's get these markers looking pretty. In fact, I guess what I would normally do is I would change the styling of my divs right now so that I could, because like right now I don't like how this takes up the entirety of the screen. So I guess instead of working with the divs, what we're going to do instead is we're going to work with an argument inside of layout. So I guess I'm not going to do colors right now. We're gonna worry about the layout instead. So the first argument that we're going to pass in here is margin, and margin is going to be a dictionary like everything, and we're going to give it let's say a 20% buffer. L. That is what it wants. There we go. Okay, so yeah, the left-hand side of our margin is going to have a 20% buffer. Right-hand side will be 20% as well. Bottom will also be, I don't know, 10%. I guess it doesn't really matter. Just trying to make it pretty. And then the top will also be 10%. Excellent. So let's see if that works like we want it to. It's still working? Hey, it says it's working. So we've made it a little, well, it's inside the div, so it's inside the plot leaf figure. So it's, ideally, if you wanted to make this shrunk, we would change the div. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go over to our div that holds everything. We're gonna say style is equal to width, and then I like, I don't know, 70% or something like that. And then I think that'll be broken in one way, so we'll have to show you how to make it centered. So it should be on the left-hand side. Great, it's all on the left-hand side there. So width is 70%. Now we're going to give it this margin. I think it's the argument exactly. Yeah, there we go. Oh, yeah. So margin left. It's going to be auto. I think is what the argument is. Yeah, auto. Great. And then we're just going to copy that over. Margin right. So that'll auto-center it for us. Hey, look at that. Okay, it's starting to look a little bit less of an eyesore, right? Great. So let's go over to our variables app. Let's give a colors list. So colors, we're going to have red, green, and blue. Blue. Okay, blue. And then going down to where we make our traces, we're going to give it another new argument now. So instead of mode, we're going to say markers. And then markers is going to be its own dictionary. So we're going to have color equals colors val. And this is going back to why I made this loop through a range of 3, is because we can now use it to make these colors kind of loop through with each trace that they represent. And I broke something. Right, that's what that is.
Got the dictionary maker, not markers.
Thank you. There we go. Every time you break it and it's doing the debug thing, you have to restart it, but that's okay. Works for most of the time, right? I broke it. Let me just.
This is probably what you said, right?
Yeah, I
Fix
think
that.
the dictionary you call it makers, not markers.
I understand what you're saying there. I'm sorry.
Sorry, in the dictionary is makers, not markers. I don't know.
Oh, makers.
Kind of cool.
I see what you're saying. That would make more sense. Markers, makers, yeah. Little typo there. Still not going where I wanted to go. I was thinking that I wasn't. Where's my page?
Markers is not allowed in scatter.
Marker, not markers.
Oh, you're right. Oh yeah, so I guess this is a really good example of if you want to do something and you don't want to go through the source documentation and all that stuff, not source code or documentation, what you can do is you can purposely break an argument and it will tell you everything you can put in there. And so I like to do that. And so yeah, we're right. Marker is the correct argument that I'm supposed to be passing in there. That's how you make apps, man. You got to debug lots of stuff. Hey, look at that though. Now we have red and green and blue all over the place. So it's starting to look prettier, but let's see if we can get our markers to look even better. So let's say size. Let's see, what's the default that I have here? 15. I'm not really sure why it's 15, but maybe still 15. See how that works. Excellent, but it's kind of ugly to look at. So what if we change the opacity to, I don't know, 0.7? Like 0.7. Oh, that's looking better, but we can do just a little bit more. And what we're going to do is we can say line. We can change the line that wraps around our markers. And guess what? Line takes a dictionary as an argument. Ain't that something? Told you, everything is a dictionary in here. So we're going to give it a color of black. And then width of, let's see, what do I have in my 0.5? Cool.
Do like Xcode or anything else work in those? Or
Xcode?
like color codes like that, RGB values?
Probably, yes. I have seen it. I just don't use it myself. But yeah, definitely you could use there's other information sources. So this is probably going to be a stopping point for us right now. So just because I don't want to take up all the time of everyone's evening. Some things that I wanted to get to is I wanted to pass names over here. I wanted to make it default to be hover on closest because I think this is much prettier way to interact with it rather than having, click, whatever. Anyway, and I also want to get rid of this tool belt right up here at the top right because I personally think it's kind of ugly and I don't like it and I always by default get rid of it. But you can see a lot of these other options that I did change in the niceapp.py, which is on this repo that we have here. Things that I want to show you quickly before we get I guess I can actually show you. But
Don't feel rushed.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna go to desktop.
We'll close it down.
Temp. This is where it is. Yeah, that's where it is. Okay, so here's what this is gonna be. I had no idea how long everything was gonna take.
Yeah.
But
It's great.
where? Oh, it's right, because it's actually, you know what? I don't have to, because we're gonna go. Yeah, we're gonna change the port on this. We're gonna open up an atom, and we're gonna scroll down to this is everything we're gonna do tonight, right? All 260 code. We're gonna say port equals 8051. 8015 doesn't really matter. Yes, 8051. Nope. Whoops. There we go. Python app. Let's see if it'll be like, okay. And then we'll go to the new tab, change the port to 8051. Great. So this is like kind of the end goal that I kind of want to get to. But basically, I'm using sklearn to make. I have a function that makes, it gets some data and then it makes a regression of that data. And then I just figured, hey, it'd be kind of cool if you could select which trend you want to look at and stuff like that. And then you could also.
Can you kind of point out where in the code where those trend lines are coming from?
Yes, I can. And in fact, actually, I lied. I said it was in a separate function, but I just stuffed it into my callback, which is, it's preference, whatever. But I did use. It's between the markers trace that we have, and there's a little. I guess this is the same markers that we were able to get to. And in between the layout, also I forgot to say that you can put x-axis and y-axis, and that's how you change the hover mode there. But this is the little block in that final app. In fact, I don't think that final app is in the repo right now. But basically, I will put that up by the end of this week. I think the README right now just says I didn't finish the deployment. Sorry. Yeah. So I'll have it up eventually. Probably I think Saturday, Friday, or something like that.
It says 414.
It's Saturday, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I gave myself till Saturday until I said I would fix it. So this will be up there. But I thought it was kind of weird that I decided to do a linear regression kind of trend line, but because the whole point of the data of the iris data set is to run classification algorithms and see how they play. But it's still fun to show you kind of how this interactivity works. What's up?
Can you also show us how you got rid of that annoying floating thing below
Yes.
Toolbar or whatever.
I think it's it's an argument. So we had 3 main divs that we had. We had also here's the div that did. I guess this is the checklist, by the way, in case you wanted. So this one now has 4 main divs, but the ones that we made were the first drop down, the second drop down, and this was the graph dash core component. And it has an argument called config display mode bar is false. And I put that almost in all of my apps because I think the display mode bar is ugly. That's just my 2 cents. Great, and then let me show you guys, and I'm not going to show you the code for it, but I was working on a project, and I stopped doing this project. But basically, this is the project that I used to teach myself that I wanted everything to do in Dash. So desktop, it was a visualization project on the opioid epidemic. So I took a bunch of data off of from the CDC, and I was trying to take that data and aggregate it along with things like unemployment data. And house data and stuff like that. I was trying to make a bunch of choropleths that people could have. But basically, long story short, CDC wasn't going to give me 78% of the data, and the modeling approach that I was trying to take for the 78% of the missing data was not going to work. So I just abandoned it eventually. And I learned what I wanted to learn from Dash anyway. So go to source Dash. And then it's also, by the way, a 3-page or a multi-page app. So it's run, if you've ever made a multi-page Flask app, you start with index, and that index is what manages your individual apps, and so it actually has 3 apps running under the hood. And so I probably need to kill the, I'm not going to change the port now, we'll just kill this one. Okay, cool, so it works. So we'll go here. Excellent. So yeah, I kind of wanted to show you guys what I was working on once upon a time. So this is a line plot, and you can kind of look at death rates by drugs. So we currently have by default heroin, other opioids, methadone, and synthetic opioids you can select. But maybe you're not interested in that stuff. Maybe you want to look at alcohol against cocaine. Perfect. So we can kind of look from 1999 to 2015 how that death rate's been going on. Hey, check out that big old spike of deaths in cocaine back in 2006. Not sure what that's about, but it's in the data. It's neat.
Those are good times.
Right? Right? Yeah, great times.
Right before the economic crash.
Yeah.
Housing prices are up.
Yeah, that's right.
But this is
Everyone's living large.
But this is the cool thing that I thought that I would make. And so, like I said, I'm from Colorado, so I knew that Colorado is the thing. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to have something that you could kind of go by state or by county, and you would be able to look up, reactively what the death rate, the unemployment rate, and the median value per square foot of homes was. And so you can select the year. You can go to say 2010. I like to go to 2010 in Michigan. Actually, I think that is a good one to look at. And then this is, I guess we'll look at Happy Michigan. So Happy Michigan 2006. And then and this is unemployment, by the way. Like I said, I don't have most of my death rate data. But yeah, Happy Michigan, not so happy Michigan, and then like some of these, like you can just see how unemployment spiked during the recession. I think it's kind of cool that you're able to see this data change and do reactively, all that stuff. So that was something I was working on, but then kind of getting more on things that. The ending here is that I did want to give some resources for people because my main goal was to get you all familiar enough with Dash to where you feel like you could go and make whatever you're already making in Seaborn, or if you're a masochist, maybe you use only Matplotlib. And my goal was so that, if you have that and some kind of understanding of how Flask works, you can combine everything and start working with Dash. So the first 3, I guess if you had to only use one resource that's given up there, I would say the tutorial, getting started, that third link there, is what you want to go for. Because there's like 4 or 5 tutorial things, and if you go through there, you're going to be like pretty much a Dash expert. You're going to know everything that Dash is capable of and how to implement it. But the other things that I like to point out, the gallery will show you really cool things that you could only hope to make. Honestly, like there are some really cool projects that they've made, and that's what I use to sell people on my end product. I'm like, look at this Dash gallery. This is what I can make, and then they're like, I'd like to hire you, and then I make it something. It's not the gallery. And then there's, in case you just want to know about Dash, there's the first resource there. And then another 2 things that you all should know about is that if you want to contact me for personal reasons, the first email there. And then if you have any questions about Galvanize, specifically the admissions process related to maybe the data science immersive, that is my Galvanize email address, blair.thurman@galvanize.com. So I guess that's it. Hope we have some questions now.
Time ordered data is coming in. I guess the callback based on time.
use packages. I don't remember what the one is, but basically, you can use Python packages that are calling a database that is constantly being uploaded. So if you've got some kind of data that's going to the feed, you can access that database, and then you can pull it out and use it through the callbacks. Also, if you have some kind of a scraper, and provided that that scraper is somewhat optimized, you could also use that scraper, and it could be live doing stuff like that. In fact, I was going to do one of the things I want to do on my little portfolio projects is I want to make a Reddit sentiment analyzer, a live sentiment analyzer that would allow you to select what kind of subreddit to analyze and analyze that against another subreddit. And so I would use a package called PRA, Python Reddit API wrapper. And so it could, I don't like to mess with databases if I don't have to, so it could do that kind of stuff for you. Any other questions? Y'all feel like you can start with a Dash app, more or less? Have I convinced you that, like, the future of, like, interactive web apps is finally at the doorstep of Python?
Yeah.
Right? I was
sold.
ecstatic when I found out about this
It's
last
still
fall.
React.
So, are you kind of not insinuating, but you're saying like skip Seaborn and go, like the Dash?
No, because Seaborn is so much. Seaborn's obviously a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can make a pretty plot of Seaborn very quickly.
Do you want it web interactive or do you not?
Yeah, I guess that'd be the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to go through the headache of trying to mount something on Heroku, just make it a single plot.
Okay.
I guess what I really love about this is it's making a UX component to something that previously didn't really have much of a UX component to it. So it's actually making someone want to play with your app and spend some time on your analysis rather than just like, oh, here's a Gaussian and another Gaussian. That's cool. Something like that. I definitely still use Seaborn. So my every time if I get a new set of data and I need to do some exploratory data analysis on it, first thing I use is Seaborn because it's just so much easier to get using, and I don't need these plots for anything else other than myself. So cool. I still use Seaborn. I'm glad y'all stuck around for so long.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Blair. Thanks again.
Yeah.